Laura and I both worked at a large financial firm, one of those towering glass skyscrapers that seemed to touch the sky, filled with bustling teams managing portfolios, mergers, and high-stakes deals. We met there, actually, not long after she joined the company. It wasn't uncommon for colleagues to find themselves entangled in relationships given the long hours and high-pressure environment. Laura stood out from the beginning, smart, driven, with an energy that made her impossible to ignore. We hit it off quickly, and our relationship blossomed amidst boardroom meetings, late-night project deadlines, and corporate events. Working together, we became a power couple at the firm. Our colleagues admired us, often commenting on how well we balanced our work and personal lives, and how we seemed to understand each other in ways only people in the same industry could. In a world of finance, where trust and loyalty are the currency of relationships, Laura and I had built something solid, or so I thought. We had a rhythm and a shared ambition to climb the corporate ladder together, and it felt like nothing could shake what we had. Until things began to change. It all started with small things. Things that you'd normally brush off or ignore if you weren't looking for them. But with Laura, my wife, something began to feel different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just in my head. We'd been together for years, long enough for me to know her habits, her routines, her moods. And lately, there had been a shift. Laura had always been dedicated to her work, but recently, her late nights at the office had become more frequent and more suspicious. At first, I believed the excuses, the deadlines, the meetings that supposedly stretched past normal working hours, the last-minute calls from clients. I wanted to believe them. But then, it wasn't just the late nights. There was an emotional distance that grew between us, as if the Laura I knew was slowly slipping away. She became more guarded, less talkative, as though she was holding something back. Conversations felt forced, like she was going through the motions without really being present. The worst part was the silence that began to fill the space between us. She would come home late, exhausted, and I could feel her slipping into bed next to me, but it was like I was sleeping next to a stranger. I started to notice that when she was around, she would keep her phone close, always face down on the table or tucked away in her bag. If it buzzed, she'd glance at it with a sense of urgency, like she was afraid I might see something I wasn't supposed to. I never confronted her outright. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe I was too afraid of what I might uncover. But suspicion has a way of eating at you, gnawing away at your trust until you're left with nothing but paranoia. It wasn't long before I found myself actively looking for signs, searching for clues to confirm what I hoped wasn't true. I would glance over her shoulder when she was texting, hoping to catch a name or a glimpse of a conversation. I started staying up late, listening for any strange phone calls or messages. The tension between us grew, thickening the air with an uncomfortable heaviness. Then one night, when she was in the shower, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. Her phone was lying on the nightstand, unlocked. It was like it was daring me to look. My heart raced as I picked it up, fingers trembling with the weight of what I was about to do. I scrolled through her messages, my breath catching in my throat as I saw a familiar name, Paul. Paul wasn't just anyone. He was a colleague, someone we both knew well. He worked with Laura in the same department at our company. I had never thought much about him before, never suspected there was anything between them. But there it was, right in front of me, flirty messages, late-night texts, little inside jokes that made my stomach churn. The way they spoke to each other was far too familiar, far too intimate for just coworkers. I scrolled further, reading more, feeling my chest tighten with every word. There were mentions of lunches together, and meetings that didn't seem to have anything to do with work plans to talk after hours. The more I read, the clearer it became. They weren't just colleagues. They were something more. I felt the floor fall out from under me like my world had shifted in an instant. My hands gripped the phone, knuckles turning white as the anger began to simmer beneath the surface. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the lies. The deception. She had been coming home to me every night, acting like nothing had changed while sneaking around with Paul behind my back. How long had this been going on? How deep did their relationship run? My mind raced with questions, but none of them could be answered by the words on the screen. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, my hands still shaking. I heard the water turn off in the bathroom, and the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. Laura was about to walk back into the room, completely unaware that I knew. I felt sick, my stomach churning with anger, hurt, and betrayal. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Everything had changed at that moment, and there was no going back. I had spent days, no, weeks, building up the courage to confront her. It wasn't just something you could bring up casually over dinner. How do you even begin that conversation? Hey, by the way, are you cheating on me? The idea felt absurd, yet every fiber of my being told me that something was wrong. I'd gone over the texts with Paul in my mind 1,000 times, memorizing every damning word, every flirtatious exchange. It was like a wound that kept reopening every time I thought about it, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. So I waited for the right moment, though in reality, no moment was ever going to feel right for what I had to do. One night, after yet another long day at work, we were sitting in the living room. Laura had just come home from another late meeting, and I could feel the tension growing between us. She was distant, flipping through her phone, her eyes barely lifting to meet mine. It was now or never. I couldn't keep living with this gnawing doubt, this shadow hanging over everything we'd built. So I put my drink down on the coffee table, the sound of the glass touching the surface unnervingly loud in the quiet room. Laura, I began, my voice barely steady. We need to talk. She looked up, startled by the tone of my voice, as if she hadn't expected anything serious. Her brow furrowed slightly, her body tensing as though she sensed something was coming. What's going on, Nick? She asked, her voice cautious, almost too calm. I took a deep breath, feeling my pulse quicken. I know about you and Paul, I said, trying to keep my voice even, though it felt like it was cracking under the weight of my words. For a split second, I saw a flash of panic in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with confusion, or was it denial? What are you talking about? She said, forcing a weak smile, as though I'd made a mistake, as though it was all a misunderstanding. I wasn't having it. I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. Don't play dumb with me, Laura. I've seen the messages. I know everything. You've been lying to me. For how long? How long have you been sneaking around with him behind my back? Her face paled, and I could see the facade crumbling. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out at first. It was like she was searching for an explanation. Something that would make it all go away, something that would make me believe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But I wasn't letting her off the hook this time. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. Nick, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt the rage bubbling up inside me, like a dam about to burst. You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been seeing him for weeks, maybe even months, and you didn't mean for it to happen? My voice was rising, and I could see her flinch with every word. She shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I didn't know how to tell you, she said, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. I didn't want to hurt you, Nick. But things between us, they've been off for a while now. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to process what she was saying. Off? You didn't want to hurt me, but you were fine sneaking around with Paul? Behind my back, at work, making me look like a fool while you two carried on your little affair? She was crying now, her face buried in her hands, but her tears didn't move me. It was too late for that. I know I messed up, but it wasn't like that, Nick, she pleaded. I didn't want to feel this way, but Paul, he was there when I felt alone. We never planned for it to go this far. The excuses felt hollow, like she was reading them from some script she'd rehearsed. So what? I asked, my voice full of disbelief. You just happened to fall into his arms because you were lonely? And I'm supposed to understand that? She nodded weakly, wiping the tears from her cheeks. I've been struggling with this for a while, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It's not that I don't love you, but something changed, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Paul, he was just someone I could talk to. Talk to? I snapped. Is that what you call it? Talking? She flinched again, her guilt written all over her face. It wasn't just about sex, Nick, she said quietly. It was more than that. We connected in ways I haven't felt with you in a long time. Those words hit me harder than I could have ever anticipated. It was one thing to be cheated on, but to hear her say she felt something deeper with him than she did with me. That was a knife straight through the heart. So, what now? I asked, my voice hoarse, the anger giving way to a hollow emptiness. Are you in love with him? She hesitated, and that hesitation was the answer I needed. She couldn't look me in the eyes, and for the first time in our relationship, I realized just how far gone we were. I don't know, she whispered, and those words hung in the air like a death sentence. I stared at her, my mind racing. There was no coming back from this. Whatever we had, whatever trust or love we once shared, it was shattered. And as she sat there, crying, offering weak apologies and excuses, I realized I wasn't just angry anymore, I was done. Done with the lies, done with the betrayal, and done with her. The days following my confrontation with Laura were a blur of anger, hurt, and cold calculation. I replayed our conversation in my head over and over, each time feeling the sting of betrayal just as sharp as the first. I could barely look at her without feeling my blood boil. She'd destroyed everything, our marriage, my trust in her, and, perhaps worst of all, my sense of pride. But I wasn't going to sit in that despair. No, I needed to do something. Soon, an idea started forming in my mind, an idea that fed off my anger and the need for revenge. Laura had always been proud of her career. Our company was everything to her. She thrived in that environment, late nights, high-stakes projects, rubbing elbows with top executives. It was where she felt most powerful, most respected. Her reputation there was immaculate, at least until now. I knew that was her Achilles heel. She had worked too hard to build her name, her connections, and her success. That's where I could hurt her most, by tearing it all down, just as she had done to our relationship. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I was going to ruin her career, her professional life, and her standing among our colleagues. She had taken something irreplaceable from me, my trust, my dignity, and now I would take from her the one thing she valued above all else, her reputation. And I would do it in the most public, humiliating way possible. The perfect opportunity was only a week away, our company's annual corporate event. It was a high-profile affair, where the entire staff gathered, along with key clients and stakeholders. It was the one time of year when everyone, from the CEO to the interns, came together. Announcements were made, promotions were celebrated, and new ventures were discussed. It was, in many ways, the highlight of our company's social calendar. And it was the perfect stage for what I was about to do. I started to plot every detail carefully, knowing that I had only one shot at this. It had to be flawless. I couldn't just call her out privately. No, this needed to be in front of everyone. It needed to be public, shocking, and completely irreversible. Once I was done, there would be no salvaging her reputation. I would make sure of it. I went to the event organizers and suggested a slight change to the program. It wasn't difficult to do. I'd been with the company long enough that no one questioned my involvement. I told them I wanted to make a special announcement, a personal one. They assumed it was something about my career, maybe even a resignation or a shift in roles. Little did they know the real bombshell I was preparing. In the days leading up to the event, I rehearsed my speech over and over in my head, refining every line, every moment. I would begin by addressing the room, thanking everyone for their support over the years, making it sound like a farewell. Then, just when I had everyone's attention, I'd drop the real reason for my departure, Laura's affair. I'd make sure everyone knew exactly who she was and what she had done, and I'd do it in such a way that there would be no room for doubt or sympathy. It would be brutal, but it had to be. I didn't want anyone questioning her, or worse, trying to defend her. I also made sure to plant a few seeds of gossip in the days leading up to the event. Nothing too obvious, just enough to get people curious, to make sure they were paying attention when the time came. I wanted eyes on me when I made my speech, and I wanted them looking at Laura when the truth was finally out. Every detail was planned down to the minute. I knew exactly when I would speak, where I would stand, and how I would deliver the final blow. I even imagined the look on her face as I revealed everything. Would she break down in tears? Would she try to defend herself? It didn't matter. Once I made my announcement, there would be no going back for her. The night before the event, I barely slept. My mind raced with anticipation. It wasn't just the thought of exposing her, it was the satisfaction of knowing that, in one fell swoop, I would destroy everything she had worked for. She had built her entire life around her career, and her reputation at the company. And I was about to take that from her, just like she had taken everything from me. When the morning of the event finally arrived, I dressed carefully, making sure I looked composed and professional. I had to appear calm and collected, just another corporate figure saying goodbye. No one would suspect the storm I was about to unleash. As I headed to the venue, I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. As the day wore on, I watched Laura from across the room. She looked radiant, as always, confident, smiling, completely unaware of what was about to happen. She mingled with our colleagues, charming them like she always did. It made my stomach turn. But soon enough, it would all come crashing down for her. I checked the program again, confirming the time slot for my speech. The closer it got, the more focused I became. There was no room for error. This had to be perfect. And when my time came, I would make sure everyone remembered it. The day of the event had finally arrived. I had played this moment over in my mind so many times, each scenario slightly different, but all of them ending the same way, with Laura's downfall. The venue was perfect, an elegant, spacious hall filled with rosa seats and round tables, beautifully decorated for the occasion. The large glass windows on one side overlooked the city skyline, giving the event a sense of grandeur. This was where the company celebrated its finest moments, its greatest achievements. And it was here that I would bring Laura's carefully crafted career to a humiliating end. As I arrived, the room buzzed with the usual excitement of a corporate gathering. The company's top executives were in attendance, as well as key employees from every department. The kind of people who could make or break careers with a word or two, the kind of people who held Laura's reputation in their hands. It was a full house, just what I needed. I made sure to greet colleagues and leadership as usual, keeping up appearances and blending into the crowd. No one had any idea what was coming. They saw me as the dedicated, hard-working employee they'd known for years. Calm, composed, and professional. Even Laura, who was mingling with some of the higher-ups, smiled at me from across the room, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. I had arranged everything meticulously. My speech was slotted just after the CEO's opening remarks, a prime spot. Right when everyone was still paying close attention. As I waited, my eyes followed Laura and Paul around the room. They kept their distance from each other, as they had learned to do in public. But I knew the truth. I knew what was hidden beneath their casual glances, their shared inside jokes. I felt the anger simmering inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to be precise. I couldn't let emotions ruin this. When the CEO finally took the stage and gave his usual address about the company's bright future, the room fell silent in respectful attention. I barely heard a word of it. My mind was focused entirely on what was about to happen. The moment my name was called, I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit, and made my way to the stage. There was polite applause, and as I approached the podium, I took a moment to scan the room. Every face was turned toward me, expectant, unaware that the air in the room was about to change. I saw Laura sitting near the front, her eyes on me, smiling slightly. As if she thought I was going to deliver some boring farewell speech about moving on to new opportunities. She had no idea. Not yet. I cleared my throat, glancing down at the notes I had written, though by now I knew them by heart. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady and confident. "I've been with this company for many years, and it's been an incredible journey. But today, I stand before you to announce that this will be my last corporate event as an employee of this firm." A murmur ran through the crowd. People exchanged glances, surprised by the sudden announcement. No one had expected this. Laura's face, too, registered shock, her smile faltering as she tried to process my words. "I've given a lot of thought to this decision," I continued, keeping my gaze fixed on the crowd. "And while it was not an easy one to make, I believe it's the right choice for me. The truth is, I'm leaving because I've come to realize that to protect my integrity and my values, I can no longer stay here." Another ripple of confusion swept through the audience. People were starting to shift in their seats, their attention sharpened. This wasn't the usual corporate farewell speech they were expecting. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the next blow. "You see, what I'm about to say might shock some of you. It certainly shocked me when I found out. But I believe in honesty and transparency. And I can't leave this company without addressing something that has deeply affected both my personal and professional life." The room was dead silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Every eye was on me, including Laura's. I could see the tension in her body and the way her hands gripped the edges of her chair. She knew something was coming, but she still didn't know just how bad it was going to be. I looked directly at her then, locking eyes for a brief second before addressing the entire room. "Many of you know my wife, Laura," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "She's been a part of this company for as long as I have. We met here, and I always thought that our professional and personal lives were intertwined in the best possible way. There was a pause, and I could see people starting to glance around, sensing where this was going but too stunned to believe it. But what you don't know, I said, my voice growing colder, is that while I've been dedicated to my work here and my marriage, Laura has been dedicated to something else entirely. For months now, she has been having an affair with a colleague, Paul. The gasps from the audience were almost immediate. Heads turned, and whispers spread like wildfire through the room. I saw Paul in the back, his face going pale, eyes wide as if he'd just been punched. Laura, on the other hand, sat frozen, her face drained of color, her mouth slightly open in shock. It was as if the floor had just disappeared from beneath her. I didn't stop. I had come too far. While I've been working late nights, trusting her, believing we were building a life together, she's been sneaking around behind my back. Betraying not just me, but the trust of this company, her colleagues, and everyone who looked up to her as a professional. The room was a maelstrom of whispers now. I could feel the energy shifting, the collective shock turning into judgment. People were staring at Laura, at Paul, piecing together everything I had just laid out. It was public, undeniable, and devastating. I'm leaving this company not because I want to, but because I refuse to work alongside people who have no respect for the basic decency of loyalty and honesty, I said, my voice rising with finality. I deserve better. We all deserve better. With that, I stepped back from the podium, leaving the room in stunned silence. I didn't wait for applause or reactions. I didn't need to see Laura's face or hear the whispers that would undoubtedly follow me out of the room. I had done what I came to do. I had torn down everything she had built in front of the people who mattered most to her. And as I walked out of that hall, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The aftermath of my announcement played out exactly as I had envisioned. The corporate event, once filled with excitement and anticipation, had turned into a nightmare for Laura. After I dropped the bombshell and walked off the stage, I didn't stick around to watch the immediate chaos unfold. I didn't need to. I could already imagine the whispers, the shocked expressions, and the accusatory glances being thrown in her direction. As I left the building that night, I knew I had set off a chain reaction that would leave her isolated, humiliated, and ruined in the eyes of our colleagues. The next few days were telling. News of the scandal spread through the company like wildfire. In a workplace where rumors traveled fast, this one hit like a sledgehammer. Laura's once golden reputation was now shattered beyond repair. Where she had once walked the halls with confidence, admired for her work ethic and professionalism, now she was met with cold, judgmental stares. People who had been her friends, her allies, and her trusted colleagues, were now keeping their distance. The space around her in meetings grew wider, her phone buzzed less frequently, and the casual lunch invitations that had once been a part of her daily routine were suddenly non-existent. At first, Laura tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. She held her head high, maintaining a professional front, trying to act like she hadn't just been publicly exposed. But the cracks in her armor were showing. I heard from mutual colleagues that she had been avoiding the break room and eating lunch alone at her desk. Others mentioned that she had started arriving earlier than usual, likely in an attempt to avoid running into too many people in the elevator or the corridors. The more she tried to pretend everything was normal, the more obvious it became that she was crumbling inside. It wasn't long before the office began to turn against her completely. The reaction from our colleagues was swift and unforgiving. At first, it was just the subtle avoidance, the way people stopped making eye contact with her or how conversations would abruptly end when she walked into a room. But soon, it became more overt. People started openly talking about her behind her back. I overheard snide remarks in the hallways and whispers of judgment from employees who had once respected her. They referred to her not by name, but by labels like the cheater or Paul's fling. As for Paul, he didn't escape the fallout either. He had been a rising star in the company, but now he was marked by his involvement in the scandal. His name was tainted, and his credibility was damaged. I heard rumors that he had asked to be transferred to another department, but no one wanted to work with him anymore. He had become as much of a pariah as Laura. The company, always concerned with its image, had no tolerance for scandals like this. I knew from experience how corporate culture worked. Appearances were everything. Leadership wouldn't openly fire someone over a personal affair, but they would do everything in their power to quietly push them out. And that's exactly what began to happen to Laura. She was sidelined from important projects, her responsibilities gradually reduced, and her once bright career prospects dimmed. The people who had once supported her advancement in the company were no longer taking her calls and no longer recommending her for leadership roles. She had become a liability, and in the world of high finance, liabilities were quickly discarded. I watched it all unfold from a distance, no longer an active participant in the office drama but still well informed through the company's grapevine. It was a slow, painful descent for her, and I reveled in every moment of it. I didn't feel guilty, how could I? This was the price she had to pay for her betrayal. She had thought she could live a double life, balancing her affair with Paul while maintaining her career and her marriage. But I had shown her that actions have consequences. From my new vantage point, I saw how isolated she had become. Laura, who had once thrived on networking and personal relationships, now spent her days in a bubble of loneliness. No one wanted to associate with her. Her former friends avoided her not just out of discomfort but out of a desire to distance themselves from the scandal. In a world where professional reputation was everything, being seen with Laura was tantamount to career suicide. Even outside of work, her life was unraveling. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had become withdrawn, avoiding social gatherings and turning down invitations. Paul, her partner in the affair, had faded into the background, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. It was almost poetic. The very person she had betrayed me for had abandoned her in her time of need. Now, she was left to face the consequences of her actions. Completely and utterly alone. It didn't take long for Laura's decline to become apparent even to the higher-ups. Her once pristine performance reviews started to reflect the toll that the scandal had taken on her. She was distracted, demotivated, and no longer the rising star she had once been. It was only a matter of time before someone in senior management had a quiet conversation with her. The kind of conversation that ended with a mutual decision to part ways. As for me, I had moved on with my life, far removed from the toxic environment I had left behind. But I couldn't help but take satisfaction in watching Laura's slow, painful collapse. I had orchestrated her downfall, and it had worked perfectly. Every time I heard another update about how her career was disintegrating, how she was being shunned by her former friends and colleagues, it felt like a small victory. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my dignity, and my belief in our marriage. In return, I had taken everything from her that mattered. In the days following my public revelation, the fallout was swift. Not just for Laura and Paul, but for me as well. I knew there would be consequences for what I had done, but I wasn't prepared for the extent of the backlash. My plan had been meticulously crafted, and I had executed it with precision, but the aftermath was more complex than I anticipated. It started with Laura and Paul confronting me. The two of them, now forced into the open by my actions, came to me separately, but with the same question. Why had I been so cruel? Laura's face, once filled with the confidence of someone who always had control, was now pale, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain. How could you do this? She asked me one evening, cornering me in the hallway outside our apartment, where we still lived together, albeit more like strangers than husband and wife. Her voice was shaking, somewhere between anger and heartbreak. You didn't just end our marriage, you humiliated me in front of everyone I work with. What were you thinking? For a moment, I didn't respond. I stared at her, taking in the full scope of her misery. This was the woman who had betrayed me, the woman who had sneaked around behind my back with a colleague while I had been working late, trying to build a life for us. And yet, even as I watched her fall apart, part of me wondered if I had gone too far. But I wasn't ready to admit that to her. Not yet. You brought this on yourself, Laura, I said coldly, my voice flat. I didn't make you cheat on me. I didn't make you lie to me. I just exposed the truth. You should be asking yourself why you thought you could get away with it. Her face twisted in anger then, tears welling in her eyes. This isn't just about us. You destroyed everything. My career, my relationships at work. No one will even look at me anymore. She took a shaky breath. You could have just left me. You didn't have to ruin me. I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could have handled it differently. But the truth was, when I discovered her affair, it felt like everything had been taken from me, and I wanted her to feel that same sense of loss. I wanted her to pay. Paul was more direct. A few days later, he approached me in the parking garage, his face flushed with barely contained rage. What the hell is wrong with you? He spat, his fists clenched at his sides. You didn't just hurt Laura, you've ruined my life too. I've been with this company for years, and now I can't even show my face without people whispering behind my back. I looked him in the eyes, feeling none of the guilt he expected me to show. You should have thought about that before you started screwing my wife, I said simply. Actions have consequences, Paul. You know that. He stared at me, his face twisting with frustration, but he had no comeback. There was nothing left to say. We both knew that, in this world, reputation was everything, and I had effectively destroyed his. But it wasn't just Laura and Paul who were affected. As the days passed, I began to feel the tension and negativity from my colleagues as well. People who had once been friendly or at least neutral toward me now seemed uncomfortable in my presence. I had become a walking reminder of the scandal, and no one wanted to be associated with it. Some whispered that I had gone too far, that my public humiliation of Laura had been vindictive and unnecessary. They didn't see the betrayal the way I did, they only saw my reaction to it. And in their eyes, I had become just as guilty as she was. If not more so. In meetings, the atmosphere was tense. The air was thick with unspoken judgment, and I could feel the shift in how people interacted with me. Where I had once been respected for my professionalism and work ethic, now I was treated with a quiet wariness, as if my colleagues were unsure whether to support me or distance themselves entirely. The betrayal wasn't just mine to carry anymore, it had become a public spectacle, and now I was paying the price for making it so. As much as I had wanted to exact revenge on Laura, I hadn't anticipated the collateral damage to my reputation. I had become the guy who ruined his wife's career, the one who couldn't handle a private matter privately. Some people admired my audacity, but most didn't. They saw my actions as excessive, and in a company that valued discretion and professionalism above all else, that perception could be damning. I had been so consumed by my desire for vengeance that I hadn't considered how it would reflect on me. Then came the final blow. Laura resigned from the company. It wasn't a surprise. She couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. Her position had become untenable, and the leadership had likely nudged her toward the exit. She left quietly, with no fanfare, no official announcement. One day she was simply gone, and just like that, her career at the company came to an end. When I heard the news, I felt a wave of satisfaction. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To see her pay for what she had done. To watch her life unravel in the same way she had unraveled mine? But there was something hollow about it, too. I had won the battle, yes, but the victory didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. The truth was, I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this. I had lost something, too. By dragging our private pain into the public eye, I had ensured that my reputation would be forever tainted. People wouldn't remember me for my work or my contributions to the company. They would remember me for the scandal, for how I had chosen to destroy Laura in such a public and brutal way. I had thought that ruining her life would make me feel better. But in the end, it cost me more than I had anticipated. As I sat at my desk, watching the office move on without her, I couldn't help but wonder if there had been another way. A way that wouldn't have left me feeling as though, in the process of destroying her, I had also destroyed a part of myself. In the months that followed, my life settled into an uneasy quiet. I left the company shortly after Laura's resignation, feeling the weight of the tension and judgment from my colleagues. I found a new job in a different firm, hoping for a fresh start, but the shadow of my actions followed me. Though I had moved on professionally, the satisfaction I once expected from my revenge never fully materialized. I had alienated many of the people I once respected, and despite my best efforts to build a new life, I carried with me the lingering reputation of a man who had destroyed not only his marriage but his standing in the corporate world. The scandal, though in the past, still clung to me, an invisible mark that colored every new interaction. On a personal level, the emptiness was even more pronounced. My social circle had shrunk, as friends distanced themselves, either uncomfortable with the way I had handled things or simply wary of being pulled into the mess. I found myself more isolated than ever, left with only the quiet to remind me of the choices I had made. There were moments of reflection when I wondered if I could have rebuilt my life with less bitterness, without the need to exact such a devastating revenge. But those thoughts only came late at night. In the silence, when the satisfaction of victory had long since faded and all that remained was the cost. As time went on, the weight of my decisions became harder to ignore. I had thought that by exposing Laura and Paul, I would free myself from the pain of betrayal, but instead, I had trapped myself in a cycle of regret. The satisfaction I had once craved now felt like a hollow victory, and the loneliness I faced each day was a constant reminder of the damage I had caused. Not just to them, but to myself. The life I had before, the stability, the sense of purpose, all seemed distant now. I realized too late that in my quest to destroy Laura's reputation, I had also shattered my future.